There are places that people avoid, and then there are places that people warn you about. In Gary, Indiana, there was a house that people crossed the street to avoid, not because it was abandoned, not because it looked dangerous, but because everyone seemed to know the same thing, that something inside was emanating something dark and unsettling. Doors slammed, voices were heard, and people who went inside said they didn't come back the same. This is Haunted Heartland, and tonight we're stepping inside the Demon House.
Shadows creep where the old road's been. Echoes call from the river's end. Ghostly tales in the midnight air. Secrets hide, but the land don't care. Whispers rise from the hollow ground. Footsteps fade with no trace or sound. Moonlight paints what the sun won't show. Stories lost in the undertow. You're listening to Haunted Heartland, where the past will go of its head. Every voice in the winds of gold. Every step is a haunted host.
Gary, Indiana is a city shaped by industry. Steel, rail lines, factories that once promised stability, and then they left. Entire neighborhoods hollowed out, homes boarded up, silence settling in where voices used to be. The Demon House stood on Carolina Street. From the outside, it looked like countless others. 2 stories, a porch, a narrow yard. Nothing about it announced danger, but reputation doesn't need signage. It travels by word of mouth. And this house definitely had people talking. The story of the Demon House centers around one family, a single mother, her children, and their grandmother. They moved in looking for something simple: affordable rent, a place to stay, a fresh start. They didn't know the house was already owned, not officially, not on paper, but locally. People nearby had stories, strange sounds, people leaving suddenly, no one staying for too long. The family reported hearing footsteps, heavy, deliberate, like someone pacing. Cabinets opened, shadows in doorways, and voices, not shouting, not whispering, but talking, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. They tried to ignore it. Most people would have. The Demon House became famous, too famous. Media, documentaries, speculation, and spectacle. But for this episode, we're not here to reenact headlines. We're here to slow it down, to look at what was actually reported, what repeated, what changed, and what followed people home after they left. Not every haunting announces itself. Some introduce themselves slowly. We're now going to step into the earliest encounters, before the headlines, before the investigators, when it was just a family and a house that wouldn't stay quiet. For most hauntings, there's a moment where things change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but noticeably. At the Demon House, that moment came when the activity stopped feeling incidental and started feeling personal. Objects weren't just moving, they were being moved, not randomly, deliberately. The family reported that doors began slamming on their own, not from drafts, not from pressure changes, but with force. Cabinets opened, drawers slid out, footsteps crossed the upstairs when no one was walking. At night, they said they heard something moving from room to room, not pacing, exploring, like it was checking on them. And then the voices started, not whispers, not screams, normal conversational tones, as if someone else was living in the house with the family. The most troubling claims involved the children, not because of what they said, but because of how consistently it followed the same pattern. They described seeing dark figures, hearing voices calling their names, being told things that they wouldn't repeat. One child reportedly began speaking in a voice that did not sound like his own, lower, slower, measured. This is where many people stop listening because it sounds too extreme, too familiar, too close to stories that we've heard before. But pattern matters, and this pattern appears again and again in cases where fear becomes communal. Most haunting stories never leave the family. They're whispered, dismissed, lived with. But in this case, the family sought help, not from ghost hunters, but from doctors, social workers, from the state. This is what made the Demon House different. It didn't become famous because of paranormal investigators. It became famous because of paperwork. Doctors documented behavior that they could not easily explain, not supernatural, but unusual. Sudden personality shifts, unexplained aggression, moments of detachment. Social workers recorded what they saw, what they heard, what the children said, and they took it seriously enough to write it down. That alone sets this case apart because it created a record. What made the Demon House different from most hauntings was not what the family said, it was what other people wrote down. Social workers were assigned to the case because of concerns about the children's well being. Their job was not to investigate ghosts, it was to observe behavior, assess risk, and document anything that might explain what was happening inside that home. Even skeptical, they were trained to be, and what they reported wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, which is why it lingers. One social worker documented an incident in which a child appeared to be lifted off the ground, not thrown, not yanked, lifted, slowly, with no visible cause. She did not describe it as supernatural. She described it as something that she could not explain. Another worker reported hearing voices when no one else was speaking, not yelling, not whispering, talking, as if a conversation was happening in the room behind them, but there was no one there. One account described a child walking backwards up a wall, not climbing, not scrambling, but walking. The worker noted that the children's eyes appeared rolled back, that he was unresponsive, and that the behavior was treated as a medical emergency, not a haunting, a crisis. And that distinction matters because they were trying to explain what they were seeing, not mythologize it. And still, what they recorded did not fit neatly into any category. No single medical explanation accounted for all of it. No psychological framework covered everything. And no environmental factor explained the physicality of what they described. What unsettles people about these reports isn't what they imply, it's how they're written, dry, measured, unemotional. This wasn't fear, it was confusion, and confusion tends to be more honest than belief. The social worker never said the house was haunted. They didn't use that word, they didn't speculate. They simply wrote what they saw, and what they saw did not make sense. The tension grew. Neighbors began sharing their own stories, hearing voices from the house when no one was home, seeing lights turn on and off, watching people move out suddenly. No explanations, just gone. Some said the house felt wrong to walk past. Not scary, but wrong, as if the house was somehow pushing you away. When a haunting becomes public, something changes. You stop owning your story. It becomes entertainment, debate, content. But for the family, this was still happening in real time. They were still sleeping there, waking up there, still trying to function. Fear doesn't become easier when other people are watching. It becomes heavier. Before television, before documentaries, before internet fame, local paranormal investigators were invited in. They reported cold spots, disembodied voices, unexplained shadows, and something else, a sense of hostility. as if the house was aware of being observed and did not appreciate it. Activity increased, not louder, but more focused. People reported feeling pushed, grabbed, tugged, not violently, but purposefully, as if being repositioned, moved out of rooms, away from doors, or toward them. At this point, every haunting reaches the same question. Is this environmental, psychological, social, or something else? The demon house is disturbing, not because it has an answer, but because it has too many, and they all overlap. By the time national attention arrived, the house was no longer just a place. It was a case, a controversy, a spectacle. As we go on, we will follow what happened when outsiders entered the story, when belief turned into investigation, and when the house seemed to respond. Every haunting changes the moment outsiders arrive, not because they bring answers, but because they bring energy. Expectation has weight, and once investigators, clergy, media crews, and skeptics begin walking through the demon house, the atmosphere reportedly shifted. The house was being watched, tested, challenged, and sometimes, according to those present, it seemed to respond. Local paranormal teams were among the first to enter formally. They brought digital recorders, EMF meters, infrared cameras, trigger objects. They asked questions out loud. Is anyone here? Can you make a sound? Who are you? Some reported immediate responses, knocks from inside walls, footsteps directly above them when the upstairs was empty, cold spots that moved through a room rather than remaining fixed. One investigator described feeling a sudden wave of nausea that passed the moment that he stepped onto the porch. Another said he felt an intense anger that wasn't his own, a sharp emotional spike that dissipated once he left the property. Not fear, anger. Several described the same impression. The house did not feel chaotic, it felt territorial. As a recurring detail in multiple accounts, when investigators addressed whatever might be present directly, activity increased. When they mocked or challenged it, doors slammed. When they spoke calmly, the house went quiet. That perceived responsiveness is what unsettled many of them, because coincidence can explain random events, but reaction suggests awareness, and awareness changes the nature of the story. Not every team experienced activity. Some investigators recorded nothing. No EVPs, no temperature shifts, no movement. They described the house as still, oppressively normal. This split is critical because consistency builds credibility and inconsistency fractures it. Skeptics pointed to suggestion, expectation, mass psychology. If you enter a house labeled demon house, you've already been primed. Your nervous system is already alert. Your interpretation shifts, and that argument holds weight, but it does not erase the documented events. It complicates them. Religious figures were also brought into the story. Blessings were performed, prayers spoken aloud in multiple rooms. Some reported resistance, growling sounds, sudden temperature drops, a sense of pressure in the chest. Others reported nothing unusual at all. Again, fracture. This house did not behave consistently for everyone, which left observers asking, was the activity internal to the family, environmental, or selective? Once national media became involved, the tone shifted dramatically. Cameras amplify everything. Lighting rigs turn shadows theatrical. Music turns tension into narrative. The house became an image, a symbol, a viral headline. And once something becomes content, subtlety disappears. People stopped asking, what happened here? They started asking, is it real? Those are not the same questions. Several investigators later reported disturbances after leaving the property, unusual dreams, persistent anxiety. the sensation of being watched in otherwise empty rooms. One described waking at 3 a.m. repeatedly for weeks. Another claimed to hear footsteps pacing his hallway, matching the cadence reported inside the demon house. Not dramatic or violent, but patterned. Follow home experiences are common in high intensity cases. Sometimes they fade quickly, sometimes they linger. Whether psychological or paranormal, they reinforce a powerful idea that whatever was present did not feel contained by the walls of the demon house. When too many people arrive at a haunting, the truth rarely sharpens. It splinters, and what remains isn't proof, it's division. And the question that lingers long after the walls are gone: what happens to a place when belief and disbelief are too tightly confined in the same area? In January of 2016, the house at 3860 Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana, was demolished. No dramatic implosion, no ceremonial closure, just machinery, still biting into wood. The slow collapse of a structure that had become infamous. But when a house comes down, does the story end? Or does it simply lose its walls? We're going to examine what happened after the demon house was reduced to rubble, and whether tearing down a structure can ever truly silence what people believe lived inside of it. The lot was cleared in daylight. Some locals gathered at a distance, some watched from cars, others refused to be there at all. For years, neighbors had whispered about the house: police cars, ambulances, media vans, priests, paranormal investigators, social workers. It had become a landmark of unease, and then suddenly, it was gone. The official reasoning: safety concerns, structural instability, too much notoriety, too many trespassers. But demolition crews later reported something unsettling. Workers described equipment malfunctions, tools disappearing, a feeling of heaviness inside the structure before it fell. Some said they felt watched. Were those nerves, suggestion, or something else? We can't prove the supernatural, but we can document the pattern. And the pattern didn't stop when the house did. After the demolition, filmmaker and paranormal investigator Zach Bagans released a documentary titled The Demon House. During filming, Bagans claimed to have experienced severe health issues, blurred vision, breathing problems, and unexplained emotional instability. He stated that even reviewing footage from inside the house made him physically ill. One of the most controversial moments came when he reportedly acquired physical objects from the property before demolition, including what he believed were spiritually charged items. If energy attaches to objects, then demolition doesn't destroy it, it relocates it, and that possibility has fueled ongoing debate among paranormal researchers. The Ammons family eventually left Gary. They tried to rebuild their lives quietly. Latoya Ammons has maintained that the events were real, that the possession was real, and that the trauma was real. Skeptics argue psychological stress, environmental contamination, or mass hysteria. But even skeptics acknowledge something critical. Multiple professionals, medical staff, law enforcement, social workers documented behaviors that they could not easily explain. And this is where the story becomes uniquely unsettling, because belief is one thing, documentation is another. One of the most haunting aspects of this case remains the Department of Child Services documentation. A seasoned social worker, someone trained to evaluate trauma, abuse, and behavioral crises, wrote in official notes that she witnessed events that she could not rationally explain. She reportedly observed the youngest child walking backward up a wall. She described an atmosphere so heavy she sought prayer herself. She later stated that she believed something supernatural was occurring. When trained professionals use language like unexplainable in official reports, it changes the tone of the conversation. It doesn't confirm demons, but it complicates complete dismissal. Gary, Indiana has its own complicated history. Once a booming steel town, once full of life and industry, now marked by economic decline, abandoned buildings, and urban legend. Places with visible decay often become magnets for spiritual narrative. Abandoned homes become haunted. Empty factories become cursed. But sometimes, just sometimes, stories attach to very lived in spaces. The demon house was not a ruin, it was a family home. That may be why it unsettled people more deeply, because hauntings in abandoned buildings feel distant. Hauntings in a child's bedroom do not. To explore the grounded possibilities, some investigators speculated that carbon monoxide exposure or toxic mold could have caused hallucinations, paranoia, and erratic behavior. Testing was conducted. No conclusive environmental cause was officially linked to the extreme behaviors reported. Others point to psychological contagion, where belief spreads and amplifies symptoms. But again, mass hysteria rarely results in multiple professionals documenting independent observations, especially in separate locations, including a hospital or a government office. This case became heavily tied to Catholic ritual, exorcisms, blessings, holy water, prayer. Faith can comfort, faith can focus, faith can also frame experience. If a family believes they are under attack, ritual provides structure, and in some cases, ritual appears to provide relief. After multiple exorcisms were performed on Latoya Ammons, reports indicate that the activity lessens. Was that spiritual warfare ending or psychological empowerment taking hold? Either explanation deserves examination. After demolition, the lot remained empty. No new house immediately replaced it. Locals reported avoiding the space. Some claim electronic disturbances near the lot. Others say nothing feels unusual. It's quiet, just dirt and grass, just a vacant space in a struggling neighborhood. And maybe that's the most unsettling image of all, a void where a legend once stood. The demon house no longer exists physically, but the story lives on in documentaries, in podcasts, in articles, in whispered conversation. And maybe that's the true haunting, because what persists is not the structure, it's the question. What did those people experience? Was it a case of extreme psychological stress, culturally framed trauma response, environmental influence, or something that defies material explanation? You don't need to believe in demons to feel unsettled by unanswered questions, and you don't have to dismiss belief to demand evidence. This story sits in that tension. There is something deeply American about the demon house. A struggling city, a desperate family, a battle between faith and science, media spectacle, public skepticism, private fear. We live in a culture that wants clear conclusions, but hauntings, real or perceived, rarely give us that. Sometimes the most honest ending is ambiguity. The house is gone, the lot is empty, the debate continues, and somewhere between belief and disbelief is the space where Haunted Heartland lives. If you stand on Carolina Street today, you won't see a demon house, you'll see grass. But if you listen closely, you might still hear the question, what really happened on 3860 Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana? That question is what lingers, and we may never get a solid answer. This has been Haunted Heartland. If this episode unsettled you, challenged you, or made you think, share it, leave a review, and join us next time as we step deeper into the shadows of America's forgotten places. Because in the Heartland, the past is never as quiet as it seems.
You're listening to Haunted.